Imagine paying thousands of dollars for a first-class ticket, only to be told you don't deserve the meal that comes with it. That's exactly what happened to Marcus Bennett, one of the most powerful black CEOs in America. But what the flight crew didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a passenger, he was their boss. And by the time the plane landed, their lives would never be the same. "Excuse me, sir, we don't have your meal." The words dropped from the flight attendant's mouth like a stone sinking in water, sharp and heavy, sending ripples through the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin. Marcus Bennett's head lifted slowly, his deep brown eyes narrowing in confusion. He was a man used to control, a man who built empires brick by brick, deal by deal. But at that moment, sitting in the wide leather seat of first class, he felt a sting of disbelief. First class was supposed to be different. It was designed for comfort, privilege, and respect. The wide recliner seats, the polished silverware, the warm greetings from the crew, it was all meant to create an atmosphere of dignity. But as Marcus stared up at the attendant blocking his view, arms folded tightly, chin tilted in defiance, he felt none of that. A silence swept across the rows. A few passengers turned their heads, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Some smirked, as though they'd stumbled onto free entertainment. Others whispered under their breath, their voices like buzzing flies. Marcus straightened in his seat, his commanding presence filling the small space. "I paid for first class," he said evenly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I deserve the same treatment as everyone else." The attendant didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering into a hiss that only a few around them could hear. "You'll eat what we give you. If you don't like it, too bad." The moment stretched, tense and uncomfortable. A woman 2 seats away covered her mouth in mock shock. A man near the aisle chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Guess first class isn't for everyone," he muttered just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Heat crept up Marcus's neck, but outwardly he remained composed. Years of boardroom battles, cutthroat negotiations, and public scrutiny had trained him to control his emotions. But inside, irritation simmered. This wasn't about food. It wasn't about a simple meal. It was about principle. Every ticket in first class came with the promise of top-tier service, the same for every passenger regardless of who they were. But Marcus could feel it, this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a shortage of meals. This was personal. The attendant's folded arms, the disdain in her eyes, the quiet chuckles of other passengers, it all pointed to the same ugly truth. They didn't see him as someone who belonged there. Marcus forced himself to take a slow breath, his large hands resting on the armrests of his seat. He knew exactly what was happening, and though anger pressed hard against his calm exterior, he didn't let it explode. Instead, he studied the people around him. The man sipping champagne 2 rows ahead, who looked back and smirked. The older couple whispering, their heads close together. Even the young businessman across the aisle who shook his head in silent amusement, as if to say, "Why fight it?" Marcus's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another passenger, maybe a little too demanding, maybe a little too proud. Someone they could mock without consequence. But Marcus Bennett wasn't just another passenger. He was the passenger, the man who, with one phone call, could change the future of every employee on that plane. He wasn't simply a billionaire flying home. He was the majority shareholder of the very airline they were working for. And that simple fact gave him a kind of power that no one in the cabin could begin to imagine. He sat back in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks, his movements slow and deliberate. If they thought denying him a meal would humiliate him, they were gravely mistaken. Because Marcus had already made a silent promise to himself, the humiliation might sting now, but when the wheels touched the ground, the tables would turn. And when they did, no smirk, no whisper, no mocking laugh would remain. The same crew that sneered at him in the air would soon learn what it felt like to be stripped of their dignity, on the ground, in front of everyone. The plane hummed softly as it cut through the clouds, but inside Marcus Bennett's first-class cabin, the air felt heavier with each passing minute. When the meal service began, Marcus watched as the attendants moved down the aisle with polished trays, plates of steak glistening under warm cabin lights, bowls of salmon and roasted vegetables, glasses of champagne and wine poured with care. Every passenger in first class received their meal with a smile, their trays laid out like miniature feasts. Everyone, except Marcus. He had asked once, politely, when his turn came. The attendant barely looked at him. The second time, she rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and kept moving. And now, as the trays had all been handed out and he was the only passenger without food, the sting of embarrassment pressed deep into his chest. A man 2 seats over leaned across the aisle with a smirk. "What's the matter, buddy? Didn't order early enough?" His tone dripped with sarcasm, drawing quiet laughs from the passengers nearby. Marcus's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being the punchline in any room. Yet here he was, the only person in first class without a meal, surrounded by strangers who assumed he simply didn't belong. The whispers began to rise, subtle but sharp. Must have messed up his booking. Probably one of those guys trying to look rich. Bet he got bumped up with points. Every word felt like a needle. Marcus sat tall, refusing to let the weight of their judgment show. But the humiliation was undeniable. In the world of business, perception mattered. And right now, the perception was that Marcus Bennett, one of the wealthiest and most powerful black CEOs in the country, was just another man out of his league. He pressed the call button on his seat. The same attendant approached slowly, her smile forced, her voice laced with annoyance. "Yes, sir," she asked, as though his very request was a burden. "My meal," Marcus replied calmly, though his tone carried authority. "I've been patient. I'd like to know why I haven't received it." Her smile slipped. She leaned closer, her voice low so others wouldn't hear, but Marcus knew they were all watching. "Like I told you before," she whispered sharply, "we don't have anything left for you. You'll have to deal with it." The audacity left Marcus momentarily speechless. He had never, in all his years of traveling the world, been denied such a basic courtesy. And yet here, on an airline he helped build, he was being treated like a nuisance. The whispers grew louder now, mixed with muffled laughter. The man across the aisle chuckled, cutting his steak with deliberate slowness, as if to rub it in. "Guess first class doesn't guarantee everything, huh?" he sneered. Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He could have lashed out. He could have revealed right then and there who he was, the man who owned more shares of this airline than anyone else alive. But instead, he chose silence. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes scanning the cabin. The other attendants avoided his gaze, pretending to be busy, clearly aware of what was happening but choosing not to intervene. It wasn't just one employee anymore, it was the entire crew, unified in their quiet disrespect. They thought they were making him small, stripping him of dignity one cold glance and dismissive remark at a time. But what they didn't know was that Marcus had already begun forming a plan. The humiliation might have burned in that moment, but Marcus Bennett wasn't a man who stayed burned for long. He was the kind of man who took an insult and turned it into a lesson, a very costly lesson for those who dared to disrespect him. So he stayed quiet. He let them serve everyone else, let them laugh, let them mock. He let them believe they had won. Because once the wheels touched the ground, Marcus intended to remind them of exactly who he was, and just how expensive their arrogance would become. As the minutes dragged on, the humiliation Marcus had endured at 30,000 feet turned into something else, resolve. He sat motionless in his seat, appearing calm to anyone who glanced his way. But behind those steady eyes, his mind was moving like a well-oiled machine. Marcus Bennett was not just any passenger. He wasn't the type of man to stew in silence and let an insult pass. Every major deal he had ever made, every empire he had ever built, was born from moments just like this, moments when others underestimated him. The attendants thought they'd gotten away with it. They believed that once the plane landed, their little show of arrogance would be forgotten, brushed aside as a minor inconvenience. But Marcus had already decided this would not be forgotten. He shifted slightly in his seat and pulled out his phone. The attendants glanced his way but quickly looked off, assuming he was sending another frustrated message to a friend. What they didn't know was that Marcus wasn't texting just anyone, he was messaging his personal assistant, who was waiting at the airport for his arrival. The message was short, efficient, and carried the kind of weight only Marcus Bennett's words could hold. Have the boardroom ready. Call legal. Meet me at the gate. He tucked the phone away and adjusted his cufflinks, his composure unshaken. To the untrained eye, Marcus looked like a man simply biding his time until landing. But inside, every second was part of a larger calculation. The cabin lights dimmed as the captain's voice crackled over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making our descent shortly into New York. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing. On behalf of the crew, we thank you for choosing to fly with us. Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Thank you for choosing to fly with us. The very people who should have been grateful to serve their passengers had mocked and humiliated him instead. And worse, they had done it under the brand that bore his name and reputation. As the plane tilted gently downward, Marcus glanced at the faces of the attendants one last time. They were smiling again, their voices sweet as they reminded passengers to adjust their seats. To the casual traveler, they looked professional, composed, and friendly. But Marcus knew better. He had seen behind the mask. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and passengers shifted in their seats, eager to stretch their legs after hours in the air. Some still cast amused glances at Marcus, as though the memory of his empty tray was a private joke they'd share later at dinner parties. Marcus didn't react. He let them laugh. Because the real show hadn't even started yet. The wheels screeched against the runway, a burst of speed pressing everyone back into their seats. A ripple of applause moved through the cabin, the age-old tradition of thanking pilots for a safe landing. But Marcus didn't clap. His hands rested firmly on his lap, his mind already 5 steps ahead. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus's phone buzzed again. A single message flashed across the screen from his assistant. Everything is ready, sir. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't the kind of smile born from humor or amusement. It was the smile of a man who knew he held all the cards. The attendants unbuckled and began their final checks, their voices polite and cheerful once more. Thank you for flying with us, one said to a departing passenger. We hope to see you again soon, another added. But when their eyes landed on Marcus, their tone cooled. They thought the humiliation had ended. They thought the problem had been left at 30,000 feet. They were wrong. Because the moment Marcus stepped off that plane, their world was about to change. The arrogance that had kept them afloat in the sky was about to crash harder than any plane could. And Marcus Bennett, the man they had mocked, ignored, and treated as if he didn't belong, was about to remind them in the most unforgettable way who really controlled the skies. The jet bridge door hissed open with a mechanical sigh, and the passengers filed out, stretching their stiff limbs and pulling luggage behind them. Most were thinking about connecting flights, meetings, or dinners waiting at home. But Marcus Bennett's mind was locked on one thing only: accountability. As he stepped into the terminal, the scene shifted instantly. Waiting at the gate wasn't just the usual ground crew, there was a small entourage of executives in sharp suits, legal staff with briefcases, and his assistant holding a neat leather folder. They stood in a line, professional but tense, as though preparing for battle. Passengers slowed their steps, whispering in confusion. Who are all those people waiting for him? Is he someone important? Wait, what's going on? The flight crew emerged behind Marcus, still smiling faintly, their earlier arrogance intact. But the moment they noticed the row of executives, their smiles faltered. The lead attendant frowned, her eyes darting between Marcus and the gathering ahead. Something was wrong, and for the first time during the entire flight, the crew felt it. Marcus stopped, adjusted his jacket, and turned slowly to face them. His voice carried easily over the hum of the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen of the flight crew, he began, his tone calm yet commanding. Allow me to reintroduce myself. Every head turned. The crew stiffened. Even the passengers who had mocked him on the flight stopped in their tracks. "My name is Marcus Bennett," he continued, each word deliberate. "I am not just a passenger. I am the majority shareholder of this airline. Every paycheck you've ever received, every uniform you wear, every plane you step on, runs through me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One passenger actually dropped his bag in shock. The whispers grew louder now, but this time they weren't mocking, they were filled with awe. The lead flight attendant's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, searching for words, but nothing came out. Marcus's assistant stepped forward and handed him the leather folder. He opened it calmly, flipping to the first page. The sound of papers rustling in the quiet terminal was like thunder. He locked eyes with the crew. "During this flight, I was denied service. I was mocked. I was humiliated by the very people whose job is to represent my airline with dignity. If this is how you treat me, I can only imagine how you treat passengers who have no voice, no power, no title." The words landed heavy, like stones dropped into still water. Passengers stood frozen, watching history unfold in front of them. Some even began recording on their phones, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would spread far beyond this airport. Marcus pulled out a stack of letters from the folder. He held them up, then let them fall back into place with a sharp snap. "These," he said firmly, "are your termination letters. Effective immediately." The crew's faces twisted in disbelief. One tried to protest, stammering, "Yes, sir, please, this was a misunderstanding." Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "No. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a choice. A choice to treat a paying customer with contempt. A choice to act with arrogance instead of respect. And today, you face the consequences of those choices." Security staff, who had been standing discreetly nearby, now stepped forward. The crew members looked around desperately, but there was no escape. Their earlier laughter, their mocking whispers, all seemed to hang in the air like ghosts of arrogance now turned against them. Some passengers clapped softly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few even cheered. Marcus handed the folder back to his assistant, his expression steady, controlled, but unyielding. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His power came not from volume but from presence, from the undeniable weight of his authority. "Respect," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying across the terminal. "That is the foundation of this airline. And as long as I own it, there will be no place for anyone who forgets that." The crew stood frozen as security escorted them away, their heads lowered, their once proud uniforms now symbols of disgrace. And as Marcus turned to walk toward the awaiting executives, phones flashing, cameras rolling, the message was clear: the sky may be vast, but disrespect had no place in it, not under his watch. That evening, the story spread like wildfire. Passengers who had recorded the confrontation posted their clips online, and within hours, Marcus Bennett's name was trending across social media. Headlines flashed across news outlets. Airline CEO fires entire flight crew after experiencing disrespect firsthand. Billionaire teaches powerful lesson in dignity at 30,000 feet. Reporters swarmed the press room later that night. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and journalists jostled for position as Marcus stepped up to the podium. He looked calm, collected, the very picture of authority. He adjusted the microphone and began speaking, his voice firm but steady. "Today," he said, "I sat in a first-class seat on one of my own flights. I didn't sit there as a CEO. I didn't sit there as a shareholder. I sat there as a passenger, just like anyone else. And what I experienced was not just a failure in service. It was a failure in basic human respect." The room fell silent, every reporter hanging on his words. Marcus paused, scanning the crowd before continuing. "I was denied service, mocked openly, and treated as though I did not belong in a seat I paid for. And if this can happen to me, imagine how often it happens to ordinary travelers, people who don't have the power to speak out, or the resources to demand accountability." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Marcus's words weren't just about himself, they touched on something bigger, something every traveler could relate to. He leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying more weight now. This is not about a meal. I can buy dinner anywhere. This is about dignity. About the right of every person, regardless of color, status, or background, to be treated with fairness. No one, should ever feel small simply for being who they are. The cameras flashed brighter. Reporters scribbled furiously. The moment was electric. Marcus went on to announce sweeping reforms for his airline, mandatory respect and diversity training for all employees, a new passenger feedback system, and strict consequences for any staff who disrespected travelers. We will raise the standard, he declared. Not just in luxury, but in humanity. The applause that followed wasn't just from reporters. Even airline staff in the room clapped, realizing this moment wasn't about punishment, it was about change. That night, as the clips of Marcus's speech spread across the internet, people around the world reacted. Some praised his decisiveness. Others admired his humility in not using his status right away. But all agreed on one thing: the message was unforgettable. And for Marcus, that was the point. Because in the end, it wasn't about firing a crew or making headlines. It was about sending a reminder that respect is not a luxury. It is a necessity. From that day forward, whenever passengers stepped onto one of Marcus Bennett's planes, they knew one thing for certain: they weren't just boarding a flight. They were stepping into an airline built on a promise that dignity always comes first. And that's the powerful lesson Marcus Bennett left behind: respect is worth more than luxury, and dignity is non-negotiable. If you enjoyed this story and want more inspiring tales just like it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss our next upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.